Morning, everybody. How are you? Monday morning, time to get to work. Haven't done too many lives, but thought you might enjoy it. There's one subject that was kind of on everybody's mind at this time of year after deer season, of course, and that's like habitat. Forestry comes out there. Another subject would be for sure the legislation, either with guns or wildlife type stuff. So this is the time of year when you have a little bit of time. Make sure you kick your 2 cents in on all that kind of stuff and support all the causes that help the whole thing. I know when I became a landowner, I've got 65 acres in Northfield and like 33 or 34 in Wamestown on the opposite side of the road. And when I became a landowner and I wanted to help out the deer a little bit, and like I wanted to maybe if I could make a little extra change and help cover the taxes, I'd cut some trees. And I've been doing that for quite a while now, and by no means a small amount. I was at first I made a pole on the back of my tractor just so that I could lift up multiple logs. I took a pole, put it on my 3-point hitch, and I welded up an upright, and I cut slots in it so that the chains could be draped over it, and it would lift the end of the log, and then I could just drag it right out. So I did that at first, and I couldn't believe the amount of wood I could pull and move with my 135 Massey. So I started doing that a little bit, and I got quite a bit done. And one of my first moves I ever did was I did a little clear cut. After being hunting in Maine and seeing all kinds of, the benefits of open areas. And that's another thing that none of my neighbors had. I want to do the opposite of what my neighbors had. So I made a little small clear cut, opened it up, and it was only about half, 3/4 of an acre. I couldn't believe the amount of trees I got off from it. And they were mostly maple poles, and everything was like 10 inches or smaller. So it was an old pasture that had grown up fairly recently, probably since the 70s maybe. And that was really nice because it was like the most perfect firewood. And I did it right in the spring, March-ish, the end of the winter, beginning of the spring, so that the deer could really benefit from it. And the snow was down a little bit. And so the boys and I just started cutting as much as we could and just started killing nearly everything in this one little spot. And I only saved a couple, 3 real nice, decent trees that would be logs someday. So I saved those. That little clear cut made quite a difference to that little spot. Now, of course, when you look at Vermont and you see, the average tree is a 12-inch hardwood. You drive down I-89 or 93 and you look at the woods and you see nothing but 12-inch hardwoods rolling by you, one right after the other. And it's quite a almost like desert in a way for a lot of the songbirds, small game and stuff like that, because it's an exterior forest. Most of Vermont's forest is an exterior one with like the inside part of it is disappearing. It would take, another 70 years or so for it to become more old growth type thing where the trees are really big. And that would probably, if anything, let in a little more light. Right now, the canopy is pretty tight. It makes it perfect for the emerald ash borer. So like a lot of exterior trees with the right elevation, that's going to be a deal for that. I had a pretty big component of ash on my land. My land has a lot of ledges that are consecutive dropping down, right? That schist, what they call, ocean compacted ledge that is stood up, and now it's on an angle. And of course, as it crumbles, all the nice dirt goes down into each one of those big like ripple seams in the landscape, and that makes really good soil in those little bottom shelvings. So ash love to grow there, so I have quite a pretty good ash component. When the emerald borer was coming along, I was really, a little bit worried about that. Before that, I owned the place for quite a while, well over 30 years. So I started going up, and the woods had been cut by A. Johnson, probably almost 3 or 4 or 5, 3 months probably of them being here. They had a fell buncher. They went through and they cleaned a lot of the bigger, real nicer wood. They left a lot of 10, 12 inches and that size stuff. They left a lot of that. And they left a lot of white birch. They left a lot of the ash component and a lot of yellow birch as well. And the yellow birch, of course, real good for wildlife. So I was really happy with that. The spruces were old. A lot of them were 90. They grew in a pasture, right? All of your hemlock and all of your red spruce, which are species that cows don't eat, those patches where they now exist, of course, all used to be pasture, and they were shade cover for the trees, and the cows didn't eat them. So those are real key components of our like winter landscape for deer everywhere in Vermont, or even in New England as far as that goes. And all of the river valleys and those spots where it's steeper and the soil isn't so good, that's where those hemlocks and spruce want to grow. Balsam fir, of course, is also awesome, but it has a shorter lifespan. And when it gets to 9 inches and above, it's more likely to have center rot in it a little bit, and the ants will get in them. Most of the time when they get to 10, 12, 14 inches is pretty unusual for them to get real big. And if they are real big, especially the way the weather's been lately, they haven't been doing real good. And a lot of those are starting to die. And I felt bad because a lot of my trees way back then were starting to go. And so I started cutting some spruce, and we had pretty good storm come along. Irene was a pretty decent storm. We had a few of them before that were real hurricane kind of stuff, and I had a lot of blowdowns. A lot of my spruce were thinned. A lot of babies were growing underneath, and they were really small when I bought the place. Most of them were 2 feet and less, but there was like bazillions of little babies growing underneath with, actually, Rose Beatty was a forester, and she did a beautiful job leaving those trees to shade the babies, and that so that it could regrow. This was part of an old deer yard here, and my neighbors have been feeding them for way too long, and they kind of ate everything. There was way too many deer here for quite a while, and now there was kind of hardly any, and I wanted to like restore part of that deer yard situation. So I worked on it pretty hard, and every year I just kept cutting as many of the older spruce that needed to go, that were starting to, they either blow down or they were starting to rot. Whenever you're seeing the woodpecker holes in the side of them and the trees starting to bleed, especially with like red spruce, that's a signal you need to cut them. And a lot of the ones that I would cut, I'd have to butt the bottoms off because they were rotten, but I would cut 16s, 12s, and 14s, and I would try and cut as many as I could. And it takes about 100 or so logs, 110 logs that are, 8, 10-inch trees, 12, 14-inch trees at the most, like those size trees. It takes about 110, 120 logs to fill a 10-wheeler. So I would cut, about 120 logs, get them all piled up and ready to go, and then I would call the trucker, and he would take them to, at the time, they went up to St. Johnsbury to Robinson. They have a concentration yard there, and Stanley Robinson would take them and send them all, concentrate them there, and then they'd go up the highway up to the mills in Quebec. So that worked out good, and I made a little extra cash to go hunting and stuff and help cover some of the taxes. And I would just cut like 1 or 2 loads in the summer. And then later on, because I had made my little pole and it was working pretty good, I started cutting my trees a little bit more often, and I started getting to the back a little bit more. And of course, I also had a lot of pole stage stuff after they had cut that was good firewood, and I wanted a grapple for my back of my tractor. And I saw like I had a little hydraulic one that stayed flat and whatnot, and so I ended up designing my own and building my own grapple for the back of the tractor. I didn't have hydraulics on the back of the tractor, so I used a winch to open and close it. Later on, I ended up putting the hydraulics on the tractor, and I used that for a chainsaw. So now I have a chainsaw on the tractor on the grapple, so that I could grab a lot of firewood type, gather up a bunch of firewood type stuff, and I wouldn't have to get off. And I hate stuffing chains underneath, pushing a chain under a log. I just absolutely hate that. Grapple is so much better, and I wanted, and a lot of my land's fairly flat and it was easy to get to, so that's what I ended up doing. I had no idea that the grapple would be so good, and I could move so much wood with it. And over time, I ended up really being able to move a lot of really good sized big stuff. I also could put it underneath the drawbar with the grapple and pick the logs right up in the air, so I could load a trailer or something like that. I could stack the logs fairly high in the yard. I could stack them about 6 feet high if I picked up the end and put it on top and slid it on the pile. So my abilities and what I could do after a while got pretty good, and I was able to do a lot more in my woods. One of the things about owning any length of any size of land and wanting to do a lot on it is that it's so much work. It is a lot of work. And at first, when I especially released a lot of the baby spruces, they came up like crazy and they were really thick. And when they got to about 5 or 6 feet, and I took the overstory shade trees off from the top of them, wow, them things roared to life. And now they're up to about 18 foot, 20 foot. They've really soared up, and I'm starting to regrow part of the canopy, which was part of the yard at the time. Any of the hardwood whips and some of the stuff that grew in amongst them, I tried to cut and thin. I let the deer chew on a lot of it, and the deer did eat a lot of them. Because the rest of the yard was old hemlocks that hadn't been cut, the upper part that I owned, the higher ground on it, became like the food source because it had been cut pretty good by Johnson. And then as I went in and did some more on it, I kept making patches. There was lots of raspberry bushes and lots of good feed, new whips that were starting up. And I also supported any evergreens that were growing in that area because I wanted the evergreens to be a little more predominant right where I am. And if there are hardwoods growing, I wanted to keep them short and keep them more on the deer food kind of stuff. And if I cut them and did make firewood out of them, I would do it where the tops would be good for the deer. So I just kept working on it pretty steady. And in the last probably 10 or 15 years now of cutting fairly steady, like with almost all my spare time, like almost every weekend, every evening, 3-4 hours, I would cut quite a bit. And I ended up taking, I don't know, 130,000 board feet or more of spruce, and most of them fir, some fir, and mostly red spruce. A lot of the trees are fairly old. Like I said, they're around 90 years old, which is on the top end for a spruce tree in this spot where I am. And reds can last a long time, but a lot of them are getting thin. And the second they started looking like they were getting thin and old, and especially if I'd been driving on the routes, it didn't take too long, they needed to go. So I would just kind of keep up with the ones that were croaking, and also to help out and clean out around the new ones that were growing. So I'm trying to restore the canopy in this area because I know down over the hill later on, all those hemlocks, as they start to die and age out, I will have a canopy and there will be food down the hill, right? So I'm trying to do the opposite of what my neighbors have on their landscape, do the opposite of what's around you. And it worked out pretty decent. But what I was hoping to at least be able to do is to get to the point where like 8 or 10 deer could stay on that 60 acres in the wintertime. And there's a pretty good amount of land around me that is hardwoods. And in the summer, they can go to all those areas. And in the summer, we could have a lot of deer on the landscape, but you just can't in the wintertime because that ideal spot is shrunken so much. And I never really got to the point where in all the 30 years of working on it, I didn't get to the point where I could have like 10 deer on my 65 acres that would be there steady and it would support them. I never got to that point, and I never stopped cutting. I learned a lot about what is possible and what isn't. I also learned a lot about how much wood is on the landscape. I had no idea. I'd pick one little spot, like of 3 acres, and I'd get in there and work hard on it all summer long, taking trees out, changing the roads, making new little skid trails to get in and get everything, and then slide it all out of there. I did my best to kind of scrape and scratch it up some too, so that the duff was disturbed and the seeds would grow. My little tractor, and the way I'm doing it, really doesn't hurt the ground very much. And it actually needed to be hurt more than it was. I soon figured out after like 5 or 6 years because I didn't want to grow all that much. The other thing I found out is like the invasives want to take over everywhere your logging roads are. So when you dig it up and you drive on it, and now the birds fly up that zone, and they, of course, eat a lot of invasive seeds, and now they spread those seeds up the road when they defecate all the way up the road. So like it didn't take long with that new disturbed soil started wanting to grow invasives like crazy. And of course, the connection of the dirt in the woods to the dirt by the road was another way for the invasives to work their way into the woods. Some of my neighbors have got knotweed in their woods now, and I'm trying to maintain a buffer of shade between my land and theirs so that when the knotweed does get up there, it doesn't get into my land, and then I won't have trees, I'll just have knotweed. So I've been learning some practices of what I should do and how I should do it, sort of ish, but I'm also learning how much I can't do and how much it really doesn't matter. Yeah, if you put in a food plot, it is like winter fat for the deer. If they eat it in the fall and they put on a layer of fat, it does help. Even though they can't get to it in the wintertime, even though they're not in that spot anymore, it does help, right? So there's some spots where I did quite a bit of work and it was actually very productive. Some of the places that were old field, and back in the 50s, the government gave you Norway spruce and quite a few red pine as well. And they would put that out, give those to landowners, and they said, well, someday we'll come back for them, you know, and it was an investment in timber and a way of getting like those old pastures that were growing up to grow into some fast, good, productive timber if we needed it. And so a lot of those red pines and Norway spruce that you see everywhere around Vermont and whatnot, they're aging out. A lot of them are getting at their end of their lifespan, and I had quite a collection of them, especially on the Williamstown side. And Rose had taken some out so that others would grow. She did some of they were planted in rows, too tight, too close together. A lot of them were boll weevilled, and of course then the bug drills into the top and it grows a new top. So you get these like successive leaders, and the tree's crooked, and it doesn't make good logs. So like some of those I had to, you know, get some good parts out of them, some not so good parts out of them, and it was a lot of work messing with it. But once those were out of there, and that used to be a field, that grew into raspberry and blackberry bushes, and even lots of spruce and fir were growing up, and even a few Norways actually seeded underneath. And so I saved some of those and thinned them as they started getting bigger, and I've kind of developed a new roof growing down there, but it's also been a really wicked brush, tight raspberry, blackberry bush, and a great place for like does to have like nursery woods where they can have their fawns and stuff. So I ended up getting quite a few rabbits because of a lot of young fur. I ended up with a lot more small game for certain, grouse and stuff like that, which was a boost compared to all of those giant hardwoods everywhere around me everywhere. So that's good. And some of those things, of course, are where once you get that land back and that ability, along come your predators, and now the predators can hunt those little small corridors that we have everywhere. So I like had a boost of small game and then a pretty big boost of predators, and the bears and coyotes and stuff were actively using a lot of my areas that were sort of formed in strips-ish, you know, like belts of really good productive woods along with chunks of hardwoods, developing hardwoods that I had thinned and gotten rid of the crooked, the crowded, the dead, the dying, and left some of the stuff that would be good saw logs someday. So that patchwork, which was really necessary, broken different terrain, was really good, but it also wasn't large enough concentrations of much of anything. So I never got back to the point where I would have lots of deer on this landscape again compared to what there was when they were feeding them. The feeding them thing just exasperated, especially the lower areas, not on my property, down over the hill and down towards Route 12. It turned that into just an overstory, like a big carport with no food at all. And it's to this day is still that way. And there are places that where the hemlocks are dying, they're aging out. Porcupines are killing them and stuff. So there's holes in that canopy that are developed. And some of the blackberry bushes and raspberry bushes and even small hemlocks that try to grow, there's enough deer on the landscape to just take care of that, and they just keep right up with any amount of food that would grow, and any amount of especially cedar and hemlock. They eat it all. Any young yellow birches that try and grow, and the yellow birch seed is really tiny and it needs to land in a really good spot for it to grow. That's why a lot of them land on stumps and start growing there, and they'll grow that root system down off the stump, and they look like trees that walk. There'll be some of that as well, which goes to show, yellow birch, getting them to seed, especially with any number of deer on the ground, is pretty impossible. So this has been a learning curve for me. I've learned, about logs, the lengths that they like them, the sizes that they like, the species that are good. I learned a lot about the defects and which ones are worth money and which ones aren't. And some of the ones that I would have thought were worth a lot of money weren't necessarily. And even some of the ones that I didn't think were all that hot were actually pretty good. So as I took each log and I sort of looked at the sheet that you get from the mill, and I went through it all and tried my best to understand what defects were, the roll-ins, the knots, good knots and bad knots, the lengths and where to cut them and keep them valuable. I learned a lot about that, and it was really helpful for me. And I also learned that there's really no amount of habitat work that you can do that if you have mild winters and you have lots of deer on hand, there's almost no amount you can do that will help, because the deer would nearly keep up with everything. It's just amazing how much they eat and how quickly also the trees around the ones that are now food sort of work that in, and the food isn't there for long. You make a food kind of area there, and unless you mow it and work on it real hard in a small area, on a big scale, you can't do enough. So keeping the deer in check with what the land currently grows is the number one thing that you can do. I learned all that. You couldn't even begin to do the kind of like landscape and work that you would want to do. You can't even begin to do the amount and really amount to something, because the deer just like respond to it and they keep right up with it. It's amazing how much they can keep up with it. You cut a tree and they've been all over the tops and chewed all the little buds off in just a short while. So it was a real learning curve for me, how much habitat. And I always thought, well, if I work on it hard enough, it'll really become something. And it really never did. I worked on it hard for years on end, and altogether probably a couple 100,000 board feet, and I don't know, anywhere between 700 and 1,000 cords of firewood probably. And it really didn't amount to all that much. I was hoping it really was going to be something, but I found out it's just not possible. If you do try and grow a new roof for a deer yard, you're going to spend 30, 35 years doing it. And if you get to the point where the roofs are all gone and you didn't grow any new roofs to replace them, that's where you get into trouble. And if the winters get real rough, it's going to be a deal. But at any rate, have a great week, guys, and we'll try to do more lives. Take care. Bye-bye. How do you turn this thing off? Or was it even on? I can't tell. I can't tell.
Wouldn't know even if I could.